So today I'd like to talk about politics, secular religion, and the state as church. And those might seem a bit like disconnected topics. So let's break it down. First of all, what is politics? Well, politics is, broadly speaking, the art of making deals within government. So, of running a country and making those deals that you have to make in order to get things to go the way you want them to. So, what does this have to do with secular religion or the state as the church? Well, ordinarily, one would hope not that much. However, when I say secular religion and the state as church, I am not referring to a belief in God. This is entirely disconnected from any kind of deism. This is connected almost entirely with the social role that was once filled by the church, now being filled by government. And I've talked about this in an earlier video, but I don't think I formulated my thoughts very well, so we're going to talk it out more fully here. So, for most of human history, social cohesion was provided not really by the government, because even in feudalistic societies, the government is, the feudal society, the government actually doesn't have that much control. Everything mostly breaks down to the local level, and large-scale control only really asserts itself on the international level. Because with feudal society, it's sort of a modification of tribalism. Tribalism is a government form, I guess you could say, local chieftains in tribes. And then those, and that tribe might be a single village, and then the chief of that village and the chief of another village have ties to one another, and it grows out of that kind of idea. It's a set of mutual obligations up and down the chain. It's a basically feudalism is a social cohesion more than it is a government structure. So what provided that social cohesion before was religion. And religion also provided a means of charitable networking. And we have holdovers from that still available in the modern world. Think the Red Cross, think Goodwill, think St. Vincent de Paul, these charitable organizations, or the fact that so many hospitals have ties in one way or another. Oh, that was a bad bump. Have ties in one way or another to the Catholic Church. Specifically to the Catholic Church. What I mean is, it doesn't have to be specifically to the Catholic Church, but usually to a religious institution, which is usually the Catholic Church, because they have the organization necessary in order to provide that cohesion and to provide those services. They have the organization, the wealth, funds to do it. So here in the West, Western Europe and North America, it's going to mostly be them. Now, that's a role that the church used to fill more broadly in society. For example, monasteries served as hospitals. the sanctuary of a church was somewhere where you could legitimately go to receive sanctuary. There was, during the Crusades, there was an order of knights, the Hospitallers, whose sole duty was, well, not sole duty, but whose main duty, as evidenced in their name, was to provide hospitality services to pilgrims, including hospitals, because the hospital, as we think of it today, as a medical center, used to be related. It comes from the same Latin root word as hospitality, as in showing hospitality to a guest. It's the same Latin root. So there used to be that. And by the way, as a side note, the Knights Hospitaller, who later became the Knights of Malta, are still in service. There is still, the Knightly Order of the Hospitallers still exists, and they serve as a sort of Catholic variant of the Red Cross across the world, which is, I think, a very good thing. However, how do I tie this back into government? Well, as religion used to serve that function of providing social cohesion and providing and charitable networking, we began to lose that in the West, really starting in the 20th century, mostly following the World Wars. Following the World Wars, there was an increase in the idea that the old ways had died. Traditions really died there, I think. Or, I mean, in my estimation, from what I've read, that's when things really took a dive for most of our traditional institutions. You have then the birth of FDR's Great Society, I think it was called, and stuff like that, that pushes us towards relying on the government for our social structures, our social cohesion, and our charitable networking. And this is a bad place to put the government in. Or let me try to rephrase that to be a little more accurate. These are the wrong duties with which to entrust the government. Because the government, in the absence, or in absentio of constraining forces of religion, will begin to set itself up in such a way as to imitate religion. They are now the arbiters of, well, Social Security, for example. They are the arbiters of that. They provide unemployment checks and stuff. And here's another example of that being handled extra-governmentally in the Middle Ages, would be within the guild system. And the guilds were around far beyond. The guilds are sort of the best thing about unions, combined with the best thing about trade partnerships. As far as I can tell, they would oversee standards and quality assessments. They would set wages, and if a shop went out of business, they would provide for the shop members who were members of the guild. They would provide for them until they got back on their feet with a new shop. So there was a social safety net. There was another kind of social network, I guess you could say, although I don't mean it in the modern term, that was present, and confraternities is what it was called, and that could go beyond class, beyond profession, and if you were a member of a confraternity, the group around you the other members of the confraternity could help provide for you and provide for charity for those outside the confraternity. It was a very interesting and rich and complex system that is largely lost to us moderns. And there's a video from another channel called Popula Urbanum, and he talks about them, and I suggest you go watch it because it's very fascinating. Anyway, there were all these extra-governmental social institutions that served different roles of providing for social cohesion and such. So, in absentia of those institutions, the government now is forced, in a way, to step in and take over those roles. And unfortunately, that's a position that the government wants to be in, that every government always wants to be in, because now it begins to have a more direct control over the activity of the citizenry. If a government is in control of hospitals, for example, then they can set mandates about their citizens' health. So it's like, they can decide when your condition is, the government can decide whether or not your condition is terminal and then enforce that. Whereas when it's charitable organizations that exist for the purpose of charity, they are going to fight a little harder to keep you alive, I think. But at any rate, because those old religious structures broke down, and again, this has very little, if anything, to do with actual belief in God or whether or not you like the church. It's the fact that these structures existed, they were part of the culture, they were there, and now they aren't, and how do we react to that? And the thing is that mankind is fundamentally a religious animal, and I know that that's going to tick off a few people, probably atheists, like, we're not religious. I'm sorry, but you are. You take things on faith all the time. You've taken most of the things you know in this world on faith. If you haven't directly experienced something for yourself, then you only have it on faith that that thing is true, which isn't a bad thing, because we need a certain amount of faith, both in our teachers, our parents, our friends, and in our society to a certain degree, in order to function in the world. If we go full on skeptic about everything, then we will quickly tear society apart. And I'm going to have to pause the video here. I'm going to have to cut here. And I'm back. So, these structures have disappeared from society, and now, because we have these this fundamental longing to have faith in something, to have these securities, we create a secular religion that forces these duties onto the government, which is a state that the government will happily accept, and in fact will begin to incorporate into itself more and more, and as an incentive will promise to the populace, as an incentive for them to turn over more of this authority to the government. Now, way back when church and state were actually two separate entities, when you had the church and the state, so back in the Middle Ages, and these were not the same thing, a king could be held to account. And that sounds weird to a modern person, but the church had ultimate in its way, had ultimate control over the fate of everybody, including the king. In the eyes of the church, a king was just as susceptible to losing his way, to falling into heresy and such like, as anybody else. So a king could be excommunicated. And what's so bad about that, you might think? Well, to the medieval mind, that was a fate worse than death. To the modern mind, it's almost laughable. If a Catholic politician were excommunicated today, most of us wouldn't even know about it, and the ones that did probably wouldn't even care. However, at a time when church and state truly were separate and powerful entities, they could act to check each other. However, nowadays, with the rise of secularism, the state is free to incorporate into itself certain aspects of the church, and for a very large number of people, this will over time come to mean that they excuse me. This will come to lead people to see the government as, or in the same light that our ancestors saw the church. But they're also the government. They're the guys with the guns. So, and it's a very easy sort of trap to fall into, to cede this power to the government. But it ends up giving people who are ostensibly our representatives, so they are in their seats of power to represent us, it gives them control back over us. So we should be able to control them in some way, but in the end it gives them control over us. So they begin to have that power of excommunication that the church used to have. They have that over people. And this also happens in the cases of large megacorporations. For example, if I got deleted from Facebook, I would lose access not just to Facebook, but to Instagram and to a bunch of other services, including Etsy, because I'm signed into Etsy via my Facebook account. Or if Google decided to delete my account, well, now I lose, without Google, I lose access to my eBay account or to my, I think my PayPal account. So they have the power to excommunicate me, to socially shun me, not just from their platform, but from others as well. So we are ceding as a culture our religious feelings and sentiments into the hands of non-religious entities, and then these non-religious entities will make moral judgments that will then reflect back on us. And now we're at a point where there's nobody who's going to stop them. And this is what is in part driving, I think, the breakdown of society. Because you have at least two groups here. Those who want the government to take on this role. Three groups. I amend myself. There are three groups, I think. Those who want the government to take on this role that the old religious structures played. There are those who want corporations to take on the old structures and such that you will have to excuse me, it's been a long day. There are those who want the government to take on the role that the religious structures played. There are those who want corporations to take on that role, and there are those who want that role to remain in place as it always has, in the hands of the religious systems. However, the religious systems are fragmentary today. So the question then becomes which religious system, which set of doctrines do we go with for this? And of course, there's Group 4, which is actually smaller, which wants to do away with these structures altogether. And I think that most of these positions are untenable in the long run. However, the two groups that I think are the most harmful are those who want to cede these structures to the government and those who want to cede these structures to corporations. Because neither the government or corporations are actually motivated to work in the best interests of the general populace. And it is in the corporations' interests actually to cede power back to the government. So the two groups ceded to the corporations or ceded to the government, either way you will end up giving that control to the government. And so gradually there will come about a breakdown of society around these lines as the secular religion demanding security from the government will increase into a demand for things like socialism, which we have seen the results of, and it does turn the government into a legitimate secular religion. Think about how Stalin or Lenin or the Kim dynasty are viewed, or were viewed in the case of the Russians, and what they did in an attempt to quash religious sentiments among their population, or to quash legitimate religious sentiments, because belief in a higher power undermined belief in the dictator. So I don't have a prescription for where society should go from here. Unfortunately, I'm the guy who's going to look at and diagnose things, but I cannot provide a cure by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not arrogant enough to think that I have all the answers. But what I would say is be very, very wary of anybody who worships a politician of any stripe, of any party. The secular worship of the political class who are gaining the status of a priesthood crucially, without earning yet, are I think that sentiment of granting power to the political class in that way is very dangerous, and it's also worth bearing in mind that one appeal of secularism is we beheaded the aristocrats, and the simple fact is that the aristocrats are laughing at you if you think you've beheaded them. All you've done is taken the chains off their wrists. They no longer have to play act and be aristocrats and all the responsibilities that come with that. Now they can pretend to be members of the common man. They can pretend to act for the common good. They're no longer bound by the rules of being aristocrats. They are unleashed, unchained, unfettered. They are ready and round to go. And if you think you got rid of them by getting rid of the religious institutions, oh boy, are you going to have a shock. You can't get rid of religious sentiment in humanity because it's baked into the cake of being human. Even if you think you've gotten rid of it, people have to have faith in something. Denied faith in God, they will put their faith in politicians, they will put their faith in the government, they will put their faith in pop icons, pop culture icons, athletes, singers, musicians, TV stars. It's the nature of humanity. Don't even think. I don't think you can in any way deny that if you've opened your eyes and actually looked at our society with the mind to actually see it. In art, there's the concept of drawing what you know and drawing what you see, and I'm trying to draw what I see, whereas I think a lot of people try to draw what they know, which produces distorted and bad art, or in this case, bad philosophy. So it's like if I come in with the presupposition that religious people are gullible fools, and then I base all my further philosophical assumptions around that statement, then I'm trying to philosophically draw what I know. However, if I come in without that presupposition and simply try to analyze who is doing well, who is not, and who is coming to the right conclusions, then I might come to a very different conclusion than the person who lets his presuppositions guide him. Anyways, I'm starting to ramble, so that's all for today.